In last week's episode 85, I talked about many medical professionals in the United States lying about treatment options for patients, especially for COVID. However, the reality is they wouldn't have the means to do it if it wasn't for a complicit news media and, more importantly, social media platforms. In fact, you had to go to my Rumble channel to watch that video because the truth was entirely too controversial for YouTube. I spoke about this issue some time ago. I believe it was episode 4, where I went into some specifics regarding the primary tool social media uses to silence opposing viewpoints that are contrary to the progressive Democrat narrative, and the mechanism that they employ to protect themselves from any litigation that may arise from people who've been silenced. This tool is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. In this episode of Office of the Patriot, I'm going to touch on some of the components of Section 230, case law, and social media platform policy that allow social media companies to promote only information they want known and silence Americans that question the narrative, all with the blessing of our government. Hello, and welcome to the Office of the Patriot. In this office, I try to make sense out of the nonsense of the progressive left and rhino right. If you are a subscriber, thank you for your continued viewership. It is appreciated. If you are a returning viewer, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future presentations. And if you are a first-time visitor to my channel, well, congratulations on finding it. It's usually hidden very well by the YouTube algorithm. However, I do hope you find the content worth coming back for. My name is Myron Ybarra, and I'm your host. The freedom of speech, to be free to speak your mind in public. This is the cornerstone of a free society. Notice I did not say democracy, because a democracy is just organized mob rule, so free speech may or may not exist in that type of society. Freedom of speech was so important to our founders that it was codified in our Bill of Rights. In fact, it is the first codified right for American citizens. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Wording is important here because when the Constitution gives power to the Congress or to the president, it usually confers that authority with the word may, like in Section 4 of the Constitution where it states in part, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. However, in the case of the First Amendment, it clearly states shall. When the term shall is used, it is used to limit power or discretion, especially in the case of our government. Over the decades, the Supreme Court has addressed numerous First Amendment freedom of speech cases, and only under the strictest of circumstances did they find that speech could be limited. Some of those restrictions include defamation, student speech, certain types of obscenity, fighting words, harassment, viable threats, incitement, and the releasing of classified material. And again, there are very strict limits for each of these categories. But what if it's not government that's restricting speech, as is the case with social media platforms? Do we still have these protections, these First Amendment protections? Well, the unfortunate answer here is no, but with a caveat. As of late, we've seen that our government has been involved in using social media not only to silence and suppress opinions and positions contrary to their own, but they've also used social media to promote their ideas and their positions. And they do this by virtue of getting in bed with or threatening social media companies to do their bidding. And in this next clip, you'll see Chairman Jim Jordan grilling the FTC chair regarding the pressure the FTC is putting on Twitter or X to release data to the government.
Why are you harassing Twitter?
Congressman, thanks for the question. As you might know, the FTC's work on Twitter goes back a decade. Back in 2000,
I'm not talking about a decade. I'm talking about now.
back
12 demand letters in 10 weeks, over 350 separate requests you've demanded of Twitter. Why are you harassing them?
Twitter has a history of lax security and privacy policies.
You've asked for every single communication relating to Elon Musk, not communications that he just sent to someone or some communications he received, but anytime he's mentioned, that actually seems more than harassment. That seems like almost an obsession. Why such an intense focus?
So, Congressman, again, it was found that Twitter's lax privacy policies allowed unauthorized users to co-opt Twitter accounts, including that of Fox News. Subsequently, Twitter voluntarily entered into a consent order with the FTC.
Here's what you wrote in December, Madam Chair. Here's what you wrote in December. Identify all journalists and other members of the media to whom Twitter has granted access since Musk bought the company. You want to know the name of every journalist a private company has talked to? Think that's consistent with the First Amendment?
But it's not just three-letter bureaucracies doing the administration's dirty work. No, it's happening in the court as well. But making the connection between government overreach into social media in court has been a near impossibility. And that is until a federal court in Louisiana blocked the Biden administration by limiting the influence the government has on content moderation policies of social media platforms. That court found that in some cases, government's been strong-arming social media platforms to only allow content that they deem acceptable and to remove content they deem disinformation.
My concern is, again, and it's probably the third time I've talked about this, but the sustained attack on Twitter when the ownership there changed and the platform was committed to not taking down speech, not taking down posts, allowing the sharing of information, and not censoring information. And we just had a major decision last week from a court in Louisiana, federal court in Louisiana, where they said the government was in fact pressuring big tech companies to censor, and big tech companies was willing to go along with it. Now we have a change there, and you're going after the one company that's changed how they're doing things. That's what concerns me, particularly in light of the fact that you just wrote about this a few years ago, saying this is what goes on.
Unfortunately, the Supreme Court granted a request from the Biden administration to temporarily block or stay the lower court order until the case could be ruled on in the future. Another problem is social media corporations, in fact, all corporations, enjoy the same First Amendment protections that you and I do. The case that allowed for this is Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission. This 2010 case expanded free speech protections for corporations, and this means that companies like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are free to modify or delete content that is placed on its sites by its users of the platform, you and I. In fact, it's actually safer for them to remove the content they don't like as opposed to editing it, because when they edit the content, they can't change the original meaning of it. But if they choose not to host it, they delete it, then they're completely safe because they've exercised their First Amendment right to free speech according to case law. I call BS on this, but it is what it is. So now we get to the primary tool that protects social media platforms and allows them free rein to censor as they see fit. And this is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. The Communications Decency Act was originally designed to provide protections against civil liability as a result of third-party content from you and I. The idea stemmed from the desire to grow the internet into a virtual town square and stand-alone economy while protecting children from obscene and harmful content. Internet service providers, or ISPs for short, and later social media platforms, were the primary targets in the early years of the internet for civil suits brought against them for content that was placed on their sites by authorized users. There was a growing fear in our government that if some protections were not passed into law, the internet that was in its infancy at the time would falter and die, because these suits would kill ISPs, thus killing a whole new revenue source. Further, the internet wouldn't or would never be able to be the virtual town square that ISPs believed it could be, because ISPs and social media platforms could be now be held civilly liable for content on their sites. So, in 1996, the U.S. Senate drafted and passed the Communications Decency Act, which contained Section 230. Section 230 was designed to act as a shield against what they believed was unwarranted litigation of ISPs due to user-placed content on their sites. The concept of Section 230 actually came from a Supreme Court case, Smith v. California, where a bookstore owner was found to be free of liability for the content of the books he sold in his store, thus delineating and defining the difference between what a distributor is and what a publisher is. So, with Section 230, the term distributor is synonymous with platform. A publisher reviews and edits and distributes the written word, which makes them as responsible as the writer for the content. A platform, like a distributor, allows for the trade of information between users and only bears limited liability for the content. Section 230 also carries additional protections for ISPs and social media providers in that it grants them the ability to moderate and remove content from their platforms that they view as harmful or vulgar or threatening, as long as it's done in good faith. But there's no definition of what constitutes good faith. Section 230 granted social media platforms a hell of a lot of power over free speech, power that has corrupted these social media platforms to promote their own myopic view of political and social issues. You don't like what we say, you're gone. My last episode is proof of this. Episode 230 is being used outside of its original intent because the Supreme Court has already codified what is and what is not protected speech, which I noted earlier in the presentation. In fact, speech that the Supreme Court views as protected is currently banned by most social media platforms. In many of these circumstances, platforms like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have used Section 230 as a bludgeon to silence people that engage in protected speech on their platforms if it's contrary to their own positions. This is the issue that conservatives are dealing with today. Most social media platforms have an extreme, progressive, liberal bias. You don't believe me? Okay. Conduct a Google search on the internet for political bias by social media platforms. Exactly like that. Don't write in conservative or liberal, and I will bet you'll find that the first 10 plus links all refer to debunked allegations of bias by social media platforms against who? Conservatives. I'd like to see some data on Facebook suspensions and censoring, YouTube demonetizations, and Twitter bans based on political affiliation. And if any of you have links to this information, please post it in the comment section of this video below. Just to be clear, I'm all for protecting First Amendment guaranteed free speech, and Section 230 does this to a degree. However, I believe that Section 230 should be amended to allow for social media platforms to moderate only to the degree that the Supreme Court has already determined what is and what is not protected speech, and to do away with the absolute protection from civil suits over aggressive moderation that social media platforms currently enjoy. Social media platforms need to be put on notice, and our government needs to take its hands out of the proverbial cookie jar that is the internet. And until there are some consequences for social media providers and our government for stifling free speech, we aren't really free. This concludes today's presentation of Office of the Patriot. If you enjoyed the content, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share my channel on your social media. It is appreciated. Also, please take the time to comment. Engagement is one of the major metrics YouTube employs in their search algorithms. The more people that like and comment, the more my channel comes up when social and political content like mine is searched for. And as always, have a blessed day and stay safe out there.